Blog Talk Radio.
Good morning. This is your host, Llorraine Neithardt, and you have reached Venus Unplugged. Now, hopefully, all my, computer issues have been resolved so I can start communicating on a regular basis here. It's just been crazy the last couple of months. But such as it is. So we are what we do here at Venus Unplugged. We explore all levels of the Venusian archetype. Venus, beauty and seduction and myth and dream and the anima, animus, all things Venusian, which is basically Eros, which is the connecting factor for everything. So the archetype of Venus is also very much in terms of its profundity, like Mercurius is in alchemy. It winds up being just about everything. So we are looking at the story, the myth of Persephone, which is I also chose it at this time because we are all going into the underworld. It is becoming winter. It is a time that we go within. We have, this week in particular, so much to be thankful for, and festivities of food and friends. And I love that now a lot of people are starting to do Friendsgiving, which is kind of Thanksgiving. Friends that you choose, family's karmic, and not everybody is up for a karmic dinner, so they can do it with their friends too, which is fabulous. Now, why Persephone, and what is she, and who is she to you, both in the male and in the female? See, very often the Persephone aspect of ourselves, and the more which is what I love about myth, I adore about all of this, so that each time you read it or go over it or work with it or let it kind of cook inside of you, right, it bubbles up and you see another aspect of it. It's like, oh, look at that. Isn't that amazing, right? So Persephone, just to remind everybody, is about 7 years old, and she's abducted into the underworld by her uncle Hades, or Pluto, and so she's in the underworld. Her mother freaks out and starts looking for her, can't find her, and she goes through a whole transformational journey, and then a deal is brokered between Hecate, which would be her grandmother, and Zeus, which is actually her father, and Hades is the brother. So we got a whole family affair going on here. And they broker a deal, and she can come up from the underworld for a period of time. So this is how the ancients also described the seasons, but it's also the seasons of psyche, the seasons of the unconscious. We have periods where we're just kind of more attuned to the unconscious. Seems to be a lot of that going on right now. We're very attuned to the collective unconscious and the shadow aspects, and if we can kind of hold on to that energy and those fantasies and kind of take them in as our own and say, where is this in me? Or even if we can't get that far, which takes a lot of psychic strength and courage, not to project. There's so much projection going on, which in one way is fantastic, because if we have an object to project onto, or a person, or an event, whatever it might be, if we can just kind of watch those words, kind of like, how Star Wars started, dun, dun, when you're going out in the universe, and just see your words, and that's your projections. Those are the things. And you can't help but project, because that's what psyche does. Everything. And there's something called the ancestral unconscious. And I think this myth has a lot to do with that, too. So we've got our own unconscious, we've got the collective unconscious, and part of the collective unconscious is the ancestral unconscious. We can also look at that on another level as karmic patterns. We are our own ancestors, in a sense. So we can be experiencing a journey or attitude or a belief system that actually is not true of our own being. We've absorbed it from the ancestors. Now, sometimes it could be an excellent pattern, which we should really pay attention to, like respecting the earth and loving the trees and seeing the wisdom of it all. It's taken billions and billions of years to develop this earth. And in the last 100 years, we've kind of starting to undo that, which is not something the ancestors would go for. And also this Thanksgiving is also an ancestral holiday or holy day. I was just thinking of this one Thanksgiving dinner I went to. It was marvelous. And the appetizers, they made American Indian foods. Were fantastic. So let's give a shout out for the ancestors of the American Indians and within ourselves, and understand that we are influenced by so much more than we could ever imagine. That psyche or the unconscious is much more powerful and is running the show, whether we're even the most conscious person in the world. It's still operating from that place. So when we understand that the human being who is doing the work, as it's called, but it's the work of removing his shadow from his neighbor, it's doing immense political and social importance. It's immense. It's one less person, and we can start to see, and we've got some creative energy to work with. So when we begin to understand that, it's pretty cool. Because the power, we're talking of billions of years of information is deep within at different levels. Now, of course, it can't all come up at once because we go crazy. And sometimes we go temporarily crazy, which is what the Persephone woman or anima in a male can fear. So aware of what is not being said. But you need to understand something that is very, very important. You need to be lonely to go into the depths of the unconscious. Or, and put it in another way, you need to be lonely to help the unconscious to become strong. When we go through periods of loneliness, if we can be still and not freak out and not desperately get on the phone and try to connect and do all that kind of stuff, we can realize that if we can be still long enough in that it is in the loneliness and in the stillness of that loneliness, the unconscious becomes much more active and we become aware of what is going on there. So very often, right before you're ready to create, you need to go through a period. Sometimes it's days. For some people, it could be months of just being alone. Or the loneliness can produce such a longing to create. So it's a very important ingredient and should not be shunned or fixed immediately. It's a call. It's a call from the underworld. It's a call from the unconscious. Because in that loneliness, we don't have so much ego going on. And then the power of, and the images and the symbols that are in the depth of our psyche kind of starts to load up, and we can start having dreams that are very informative, and we can start to have even outer experiences. We're in the stillness. We realize, like, wow, I never noticed that before. So when a person, particularly a Persephone type or that Persephone aspect of ourselves, it's a very rare and it's an exceptional kind of spirit, because when we're in touch with that level of sensitivity, it goes very deep, and therefore capable of greater psychological suffering, which is a very good thing if we have a little bit of a handle on what it means and what are we doing. So that's what we're attempting to do here, is to look at how does one face a descent into one's own inner world, which is not dark. It's not a dark world. It's a world that is lit by an other kind of light. In the bright and upper world, what makes us blinded to its opposite is that the light is too bright. We want light, and we want lightness, we want all this, but it blinds us from where the plot is, where the raw material is, where the divine within is. So we need the balance, which is probably the most important part of any inner work, is really working with the opposites within ourselves. And that does take a lifetime. So we don't have to worry about running out of material. We will not be running out of any material. So the people are afraid of the depth of the dark or the unconscious, and they think it's destructive. Well, it's destructive if we don't have a sense of what we're doing. We need to go with caution and etiquette, so to speak, and the right attitude. So the Persephone part of us knows that. Remember, she goes in, core, K-O-R-E, a girl. She comes out a queen. So I'm curious as to what are those initiation rites, or what was going on within that world that gave her her own sovereignty. And a woman receives her sovereignty when there's an integration of dark and light within herself, above and below. Virgin Mother Crone. This is also true for the male's anima. So in order to have that, we need to understand what that world is. And I think all these scary, and also Twilight of the Gods and all that kind of stuff is very important, because it's showing us that there are other worlds. I mean, I wish they wouldn't make it as, terrifying. It's much more magical. But when you're fearful, the fear scrambles everything. We're seeing our own fear. But when we have a clearer acceptance or a willingness, we can then begin to understand that this is a continuation, that this is an aspect within our own self. So when Persephone, she lives kind of a double life. She's so psychically attuned to realities that she fears and are denied by most people. So often she feels like she's in a living hell. Why do I feel this? Believe me, I know this one. Why do I feel this, or why do I see that and nobody else? And why can't you be light and merry and superficial? It's difficult when you really know other things are going on, and it's terrible when there's no information given what takes place. So when she goes into this psychic awareness, she's aware of what is unknown within herself and within others. So she can't have a lot of fun at parties. She's going to spill the beans by mistake. And she'll pick up the forbidden thoughts. So that can be a silent hell. If a person has a strong Persephone, they'll go sit in a chair that, somebody else always sits in when they're depressed. I mean, we all have our habits. We usually go one place or another. She's going to pick up that depression. She's going to pick up that worry. She'll assume it's hers. She doesn't realize it. It's like being a psychic sponge, and she's part of that. Now, we can't be freaked out and afraid of everything that's going on, and the negative with others. Just like we're walking in the street now in New York, there is so much psychic fear. It's like, whoa. Now, the positive thing is if that fear can then be taken because people are very in touch with shit they don't know about themselves. Now, if that could just be observed a little more, it's not one's absolute truth, but there's something going on where the collective is making a descent into the underworld. And if we go with a little bit of consciousness, a lot of great good can come out of all of this. Not because somebody else is doing it, but it's because we are observing and integrating opposites within ourselves. And so the first kind of, it's the Persephone can very much have the seduction of the spirit world, up and over. It's a lot of anorexia, I just don't want to take in the substance, or I want to go up into spirit. But the one who is going to help her is her dark husband, Hades, or Pluto. Because it's that wisdom that is so important. Her transformation comes from beneath, from the lower depths of the soul, not from the higher reaches of spirit. And it also tells you that Mama can't help. The other part is the all-loving mother, which can be overwhelming and devouring. She has a defense against going into the descent because there's the all-loving mother who says, no, darling, you just be your princess herself, and all will be well. But meanwhile, something's going to happen externally to separate that relationship so that the child or the young woman can make her descent. Now, it doesn't matter about age. I mean, you can make a descent at any time, all right? Or we have to separate from the mother, or the needing of the mother, just like in relationships. So often in relationships, we want the man to be our mother. We don't realize we're doing it. And he definitely doesn't know what we're talking about. But if she makes her descent, or if we make our descent into the abyss, something else is going to happen. because we shed the ego. And so our innocence and our maidenly innocence, which is, I don't want to see that. I want it to be all nice and pretty and happy, and I want everything I want. But life doesn't fly that way. So that innocence must be sacrificed. And that's also when our prayers aren't answered, or actually they're answered and it's like, no, you need this, you don't need that. Now, as shocking as that is to the part of us that says, well, of course, I should have anything and everything that I want, all right? But sometimes it's no, which means time for the descent. You may get it, maybe the prize you get on your way up, or you need to, you're praying for something, or you're longing for something that you don't have the depth and the maturity to contain, which happens a lot in relationships. The wishing and the longing for the relationship, and yet there's not enough of a desire for maturity to hold that relationship. We need to know how to love. Getting love is one thing. Knowing how to love is a completely other part. And it's not just love of oneself. Love of oneself isn't just making ourselves happy. It's also love of the shadow and understanding that there but for the grace of God go I. So as Persephone, because she gets married in the underworld, she finds love in the underworld. She finds union with parts of ourselves that have great powers, but we don't know what they're about because we want the limited world of the upper world. What you see is what you get. Well, that's not much fun. So her descent will break apart the limitation of the light world. It doesn't destroy it. It says, yes, okay. Now that you know what the world of light is about, now we need to go into the world of the darkness, the unknown. Now, there's a lot of bad press about darkness. But without darkness, we can't see any images. So the woman who is about ready to go into the depth of herself, and as we can do this in a sense to have an encounter with Hades, okay, or have an encounter with Pluto. We can just start by the silence, or if we feel that loneliness coming on, just be with it. And have the anxiety sometimes of getting lonely is the anxiety and the anticipatory anxiety that we get of something is about to happen to me that I cannot control. The anxiety isn't necessarily danger. The ego feels it is danger, like, whoa, I don't want to go there. I don't want to look at that. I don't want to take, it's the other person's fault or whatever we're up to. Instead of, wait a second, I feel myself going in to a place that's kind of funky, but it's mine. And this continues even when we leave the planet, this transformation and these worlds and these dimensions and psyche. It's eternal. So it's not an eternal bliss. It's an awareness, and I think that's part of what incarnating is about. Is to really come here to this exquisite earth, to understand matter, to understand form, to understand the form of creation, and then we get to play with it and work with it, or in some cases destroy it, and we get to see what it's about here. It's concretized here. But on another level, it's total illusion. It's not real. It's what we're working with. So when we are having our little journey and descent into the underworld, the first step is just like, whoops. But we can learn how to go back and go deeper and go deeper. It could also be an active descent, meaning we're creating or we're dancing or we're using that energy to write a poem. But we're leaving the world in the form of spiritual pride and inflation. There's nothing like a tour of duty in the underworld to wipe that little smile of inflation right off our faces, right? It's like, whoa. And when we're too filled with spirit, that's hubris. And the gods don't go for that. So, as we're moving into let's say the first stage, she is, well, of course it comes as like a surprise party. She's shocked. Then for billions of years, each season, she goes into the underworld to regain her sovereignty. Now, if you knew for certain that you could go into the underworld or parts of yourself that were unknown, and even though we may call that depression or misery or introversion, whatever we want to call it, but that was actually the place to gain sovereignty, you'd have a very, very different attitude. We might even have sacred times and places to give ourselves this, or groups to give this, and have a completely different attitude towards the unknown. And very often, we're dropped into, a dark place, an unknown place, because we won't take responsibility for our power. And what we really do know, it's like, I don't want to know that man. I don't want to carry that person. It's way too heavy. Let other people, or like in Robert Johnson's Inner Gold, where he talks about, we project our gold onto others. And where is the gold? The gold's in the underworld. Where's the diamonds? It's in the underworld. That's the symbol of the self, the diamond. All right? So when we begin to make that first step into the becoming sovereign, that first initiation, we do die to what we thought was absolutely pure truth, or this is the way that it is. It all comes as a shock. And also, this is a way for those that see the world in terms of the principle of karma. This is what the karma is about. We can actually be transmuting karma, which is an all-embracing law. The self is one and is, and karma is the law. So when we can do this, it works on multiple levels. It's a deep spiritual transformation to work with this in a way to karmically. We don't have to meet our karma in our enemy. We meet it in this mystery. And part of the mystery is the silence. To know, to will, to dare, and to be silent. It's one of the most important axioms of the esoteric. So when we go into these places, it's these quiet transformational mysteries. And we're also going into the Mother Earth. He's within the Mother Earth, the creative principle. Not some bad boy demon. It's a creative principle. There's a lot of creativity going on there. And we're kept away from that mystery by naming it hell, or that something terrible is going to happen. So if we say, well, let's look at it in another way. Let's look at what our ancient ones knew. So next week, see you then. Bye.
Napa know-how.
A Napa guy knows more isn't always better, unless we're talking about full-size vans. These beasts do more than get you from A to B. They have so much space a man can live in it. With shag carpeting, waterbed, and a sweet lava lamp, these mobile abodes have all the comforts of home. With quality parts and plenty of Napa know-how, you can keep the original tiny house running longer, stronger. That's Napa know-how.
Napa know-how.